Sana Maqbool with you at B2B World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the current economic situation of the country with reference to what has been going on, especially since the first review of the IMF has been successfully completed, and take a look back at how far we have come with regards to the kind of tough measures that were needed by the government in the current economic situation, particularly in terms of the conditions that the IMF had put a long way from today. There is also, of course, concerns with regards to why is it that this wasn't done previously, or why is it that the kind of pace that we're seeing now by the government was not something that was seen previously, and comparisons being drawn to the performance of the current caretaker setup and the team with regards to the finance ministry, SIFC and the rest, and then of course with previous teams who are handling the issue. And we're going to try and understand really what is the cause of the effectiveness at the moment, and what sort of measures or input has been done by the current government in order to make this a reality and put forward the country to a path of success. There is also, of course, a lot of other areas that still need our focus, and a lot of them which have been identified by the IMF, and what sort of plans are there in terms of the government actually making this move forward. What is it going to be doing in terms of making sure that there is continuity in the process, and then what is going to happen with regards to the end of the standby arrangement, and how we're going to be entering into another program with the IMF, and what sort of preparations are already underway for that, which of course is the need of the hour. So there are going to be some of these issues that we're going to try and explore in our first segment in order to understand where we stand today and how is it that we can plan ahead for tomorrow in a better and more comprehensive way. Our next segment is also going to be taking a look at the current status of what is going on in Palestine. We know that more than 13,000 lives have been lost, many of which are children, and this is important, especially in terms of what has been going on not just since the 7th of October, but beyond that as well, and what sort of stance now the international community is taking now that a large part of it does have the world's attention. There is also, of course, concerns with regards to how different countries are responding to the current situation, with Saudi Arabia at a virtual BRICS summit also calling for countries to put an end to exports of weapons to Israel and move forward with an arms embargo. How successful will such calls be in actually ensuring that there is a stop to what is going on, and there are hindrances and roadblocks created in the way of what is happening, and the kind of atrocities that are being committed by Israel, of course, remains to be seen. At the same time, we're also going to be seeing the reaction of different countries unfold in terms of their support and the kind of access they have to the influence over Israel, and whether or not they choose to exercise that to end the genocide that is currently underway in Palestine. That, of course, still also remains to be seen. But at the same time, we see that large number of the protests around the world continue, with the international community gathering and sharing data on what is going on, and asking for the world to put ahead calls for ceasefire and end the violence that continues to exist today. So we're going to try and explore that in our second segment. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment with regards to the economic situation of the country, we've been joined online by Dr. Manzoor, who's the former ambassador to WTO, and Dr. Khaqan Najeeb is a senior economist. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the discussion and joining us in the debate today. Let me start with you, Dr. Khaqan, because you've been part of our journey in terms of our discussion as to how the current economic crisis is unfolding, and what sort of measures and steps are needed, and you're able to comprehensively make us understand really what is it that we need to really focus on, and what is it that's going on. And so from you, I would really want an analysis of how we are standing today after a successful first review by the IMF in a very in a strong position in terms of being able to effectively make the monetary board understand that these are the measures that Pakistan is willing and is actually taking as well, and this is the direction that the country is being set on, and to have the kind of alignment that we do with the IMF right now. And why is it that this wasn't there before, or perhaps was delayed in how we have achieved the standby arrangement?
So Sana, thanks for having me. So Sana, I think if I was to put Pakistan's economic management today, I would put it in 3 tiers. One, you have the adjustments going on under the IMF program. 2, you have the establishment which is carrying through with the administrative reforms And three, you have an SIFC which is trying to get investment and take a whole of government approach. In the short run, I think these three things are in vogue. On the first one, I've always said Pakistan has to stay with the IMF till it picks its exports to a level which is comfortable enough, where our external challenge subsides, as we see it. We needed $28 billion when IMF signed the program with us, which is a bridge facility. This is not a long-term program. This is a bridge facility to ride you through the 9 months till you get to a new government, and then let's see how the new government takes up the challenge. So IMF thought that we needed about 28 billions. I think the new review will give you a figure which is less than 28 billion, because there has been some adjustment on the current account, some adjustment on what the payable is on the private sector, domestic private sector debt that is owed abroad. So I think $25-26 billion, out of which there are some refinancing, some new commercial loans, some of the monies that have to be rolled over by the bilaterals, and some multilateral monies. So let's hope that the external sector stays comfortable. It's the foremost duty of the IMF to ensure, which they did. They talked to a number of participants who help us with the external sector, and I'm sure we will have the $25-26 billion, and so the reserves would probably build from where we are today at $7.5 billion. We did well on the current account. We've been able to manage it well. We've done well on the fiscal in the first 3 months. Our fiscal primary had to be in a very small deficit. It turned to be in a small surplus. On the overall fiscal also, we are less than what we were last year in the first quarter. So, overall things are okay, though we did spend much less on the subsidies as well as on our PSDP, which I think will pick up, and let's see the numbers that IMF comes in the tables. I think those will be reviewed down as well. On the cash transfers to the poor, vulnerable, low income earners, vulnerable society, 9.3 million families will receive an annual inflation adjusted stipend. So this is a flagship program. It will continue. On the circular debt, I think Pakistan made a lot of adjustments on the pricing side. In a small program, I don't expect much structural work on the energy. The gas price has been reviewed after 3.5 years. That's our fault. We should have been doing it every year, at least once a year, if not twice. OGRA sets it up every 6 months. We also did the annual rebasing on the electricity. We jacked up the PDL. Now somewhere around 900 billion will be collected from there, because you're weak on the direct taxation, so you still stay with the indirect taxation. On the building of the reserves, IMF hopes that the market will work well. They've actually, and I used to say that the administrative measures, which is the second tier of what we are doing in the economic management, people used to say that we are doing something wrong, and I used to say there is a third illegitimate, illicit market, and I've said this with you, and it's a wrong market. I am going to read to you what the IMF exactly said on the administrative measures that the establishment took. While inflows following increased regulatory and law enforcement measures helped normalized import and FX payments and rebuild reserves. This is exactly what they said. So if anyone has any doubt in their mind that they were criticizing what we were doing, we were just trying to enforce the law. So all in all, I think this is the overall picture. I think on the inflation front, I'm still uncomfortable because of the energy pass-throughs, the imported inflation, the supply shortfalls, our productivity levels. I don't think it's going to come down very soon, but looking into the next 6 months, I assume that the base effect would take over, and by June we should be seeing an easing there. Just on the last thing, the usual.
All right, and we hope. we hope that that is actually the case. But let me also focus a little bit on the performance and the measures, as you also rightly pointed out, that have been taken to put us in the right direction. And Dr. Manzoor, I want to then also understand that in a lot of ways, when we actually got the standby arrangement, and understand that this is a temporary measure for the country, but in terms of what we needed back at the end of the last government's tenure, this was an important victory for all of us. And I want to understand then that at that moment it seemed that this was quite a precarious situation for the country to be able to take that forward in terms of the caretaker setup coming in, to have a new body such as the SIFC also taking forward its own directives, and then bringing that, trying to bring that investment in the country. And then at this moment it seems that whatever efforts have been made with regards to the current government and the SIFC and what was needed by the IMF there seems to be something done right with our alignment with the IMF. And so I want to understand what really has been that missing element that you see in the past 2 or 3 months that hasn't been there before, and that's something that we should be holding on to if we really want to continue towards this process. What really was that magic factor here?
No, thank you, Sana, for this invitation. I think two or three major factors. One, this is non-political. I mean, this is an interim arrangement, so they're not looking at their domestic constituencies. So, they could relatively easier. For the political government, it was difficult to raise the prices, but they had to do it. They did. Some work already was done, and this government obviously built on that. And 2 or 3 sticking points. I mean, so if we go in the history of the previous loan and this one was energy, and after this steep devaluation, and also at the time, I mean, last year, if you look at the prices were around $100 or up, or more than that for petrol, and now they had been about 20% down, around $80, and other commodity prices also were comparatively less. So and inflation at the time was really going up, and now it had stabilized, or it started, this thing. But at the same time, I mean, these were some of the factors, but the government did take some administrative measures, and Dr. Khaqan Najeeb has already explained all those. I mean, you see, first, I think that whole of government approach, but in all these sectors where IMF wanted, for example, energy, even the previous government did something for the petroleum products, but not for gas, and this government also announced, at least, whatever the big increase in gas prices. And then I think there was another problem with the previous government, that I think Mr. Dar was not convinced that we need to devalue our currency. He always believed in a strong rupee, and in the back of his mind it was that it should not be so much, the market, even market price he thought should be around 230 rupees or something like that, and he tried to bring it artificially. And I think that IMF didn't like. And I think on SOEs, state enterprises, I think there was nothing serious done previously. I mean, they were always doing this thing, but this government was able to present some solid thing. Okay, that's what we are doing for PIA. We appointed a financial advisor. That's what we are doing for Pakistan Steel, etc. So they were going to they could present a good picture. And then I think the finance minister was able to pinpoint some reforms in the tax administration. There were 3 or 4 prominent things. On income tax side, I think they could show how they're increasing digitization and bringing far more taxpayers in the net. That also applied to sales tax and maybe central excise duty. And custom side, they showed them some plans that how they are going to tackle under invoicing in imports and avoiding of taxes. And the other big thing was that there's so much of leakage through smuggling. These people don't pay any taxes, and the goods come in some other way. And they could also show that a lot of this misuse is happening through Afghan transit and the measures they've taken. So they have some solid plans to show to IMF. And I think that's why they were satisfied. And perhaps that's, otherwise, some of the previous ones we saw that when the IMF team is leaving, they say, okay, we still have some reservations, etc. Oh, it will happen next week this way. But this time, even before, I think a little bit premature, they said, okay, it's done. And the IMF MD, they also announced that we have agreed at technical level. So this was, I think, after some years, I see the first time.
Right, absolutely. And you're right, these are important factors, especially in terms of the planning and preparation that goes into it. And I'll talk more about this as well as we move on, but there's something that you said that I want to explore further. And Faisal, I'd like your take on that in terms of how successful the caretaker setup has been. Dr. Manzoor also talked about how the sort of political pressure of decision making hasn't really been there in terms of being able to appease the voters or go ahead with policies that may not exactly be right in the long term, but would be beneficial in the shorter political gain. And these are important factors, of course, when decision makers do come to power and are of course expected to act or make decisions in a certain way. And so I want to understand that that's not something that any elected government coming in would be devoid of. That factor would always be present. So how do we move ahead, irrespective of the decisions or pressures of political mileage, and move ahead with the kind of planning and work that we now know has been proven to help us and is beneficial for us, and to ensure that this sort of trajectory continues?
Yeah, Sana, if we look at the current situation of obviously stabilization of Pakistan's economy, I mean, there are three factors which I want to highlight. Number one, primarily I would obviously give credit to the institution, the army. Of course, they played the pivotal role when it came to, if we talk about the dollars, it was being smuggled and they stopped it, and they did their best to obviously make it happen, and it is going on right now as well while we're talking. And then Chief of the Army Staff, he himself had interest, of course, in the stabilization of the economy of Pakistan. And what we saw that, of course, he's been behind, his force was behind it, that they were making sure that it happens, and of course it is still going on. And then if we talk about the revenue mobilization, of course the tax net, it got increased. And then there's another thing that SIFC, it is playing a pivotal role as well. If we talk about mobilization, of course we know that the FDIs, they are being attracted by Pakistan very effectively, and I think this is a very positive initiative, and this was the pivotal factor. Secondly, I would talk about stabilization in terms of political stabilization. We know that for any country's economy, I mean, if you want to have economy stabilized, then you have to have, politics stabilized as well. We saw that with this interim setup, of course, we know that the technocrats, the inclusion of them, of course, they were doing their best, and none of them was obviously thinking about their own constituencies, and they were just thinking about the Pakistan as a whole, country as a whole, and they have been very successful. And we know that of course now when the political parties, they have come to realization that election is only around the corner, of course that kind of urgency which we were seeing in the 15 months previous 15 months of the government, in which we saw that the political stability was fragile and it was not stable at all, and that is why we were facing hindrances when it comes to fixing our economy at that time. And then the third part, which I really want to highlight, I want to give credit to of course the interim finance minister, Dr. Shamshad, having a kind of profile she has. Of course, she had international exposure. She's someone who's worked with the international organizations. I'm talking about World Bank. She has worked with the United Nations. She has obviously internally within Pakistan. She was governor of the State Bank, the very first governor, female governor of Pakistan's State Bank. Then she has been someone who was considered pivotal while talking to IMF, because she had the international international exposure and influence. She knew what to say and what not to say, and then at the same time she knew how to tighten the things around when we are thinking about obviously getting a bailout from the IMF and the program we got into. I think it was a marvelous job what she has done, and these are the three things which I want to highlight, and credit goes to all of these. All we can do now is that the progress we have made right now, we just need to carry it along and sustain it. And next election is obviously next year is the election year, and in that, I mean, whatever the outcome of that election is, of course it would further deepen the stability, political stability as well as the economic stability. So I see things moving very positively in coming future.
Right. Right, absolutely. I understand what you're saying, and this conversation is bringing up certain aspects that I want, Farrukh, your take as well on, in terms of planning or work required in making sure that the tasks are done, or the proper way of doing things is actually carried out, the conditionalities are met, or the kind of effort that is put in there seems to be a very important factor that's emerging. And then another, as Faisal was pointing out, and we've talked about before, is the team, and then the people involved, and who actually is leading these conversations, who actually is making sure that the work is done, and their personal input within this entire scenario. And so I want to then understand that if these two factors are so essential as to what is going on, how is it then that moving forward, we're also able to ensure that the team that is dealing with the IMF or is looking after economic affairs of the country will be as equipped or as planned as we hope it would be, as how we've seen currently and how we've seen previously not working out for us. So how do we ensure that then the right people are actually at the seat and making the calls?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the opportunity. You have actually hit the nub of the gist of the problem. I think that these are questions that have been haunting us for past 5-6 years at least, if not more. And I'm going to talk about that as well, but I wanted to just highlight and kind of push back against two terms that Faisal used. One, he referred to the current cabinet members as technocrats. And my humble submission is because there is a negative connotation to the government of technocrats, and you have to realize that most of these people have worked with political governments as well. For example, when Dr. Shamshad Akhtar was the governor of State Bank, there was a political government in the country, and she actually worked in tandem. Previously also, she worked with the previous caretaker setup. At that time also, it was, if not political government, it was politically appointed government, right? Because the parliament or leader of the treasury benches and leader of the opposition agreed in principle to nominate the then caretaker prime minister, and that is the case this time also. So let us not call them technocrats. The second term that was used was political stabilization. With words that are political constructs in this country, with economic stabilization or fiscal stability, the two deficits, actually twin deficits, go down fiscal deficit goes down, current account deficit goes down as well. But whenever you have tried to affect political stabilization in the country artificially, democracy's deficit keeps on increasing. So if you want to go down that path, I can give you a couple of recommendations on that as well. But I wanted to actually point out that stability of our economic agenda is the of utmost importance. So I wanted to actually point out that immediately after Pakistan, reached a staff level agreement with IMF, IMF actually released its technical report, PIMA, which is Public Investment Management Assessment. There are some hair-raising facts about that, Sarah. One regarding PSDP, or public sector development programs that we keep on lauding every budget, that this is something substantial and it is going to have a positive impact on the economy. In that context, Sana, they have revealed that there are 244 new PSDP projects worth 2,261 billion rupees, right? And they say that an average, maturation or delivery of an average PSDP program is 14.1 years. 14.1 years, Sana. I think that a generation grows up in that time. And when it comes to management and all these issues, if we are talking about planning, there are bits of Pakistan's economy that keep on planning in vain, because these projects might actually reach somewhere, but in the middle they are lost and the whole point is lost because population keeps on increasing. On the other side, they have also asked for, and this is amazing, because I didn't think that neoliberals usually believe in such kind of planning, but they have asked for revival of 5-year plans. So what does this mean? That they are saying that A, correct or fix your PSDP, your development programs, because A, they are important, secondly, they are too time consuming and money wasting, so fix that, and B, also bring in a 5-year plan so that you know where you are headed. Now, on one side, this is the situation. Then I look at the state of affairs in the past 6 years, when we kept on changing finance ministers quicker than anybody would change their coat or their dresses, for that matter. Every few months there was a new finance minister. So with that kind of situation, now the question comes back to stabilization, economic, actually political stabilization. So here's the democracy deficit. In the past also, state of Pakistan asked various elected governments to include certain people who were not elected, but they were there and they were important. The question is, will all the political parties be ready?
Right, absolutely. And this is important, Farrukh, and we'll explore the democracy deficit further and try to understand how we can actually fix that as well. But I'll come back to that. Dr. Khaqan, the planning aspect then is really important, especially in terms of what lies ahead of the standby arrangement, as you mentioned earlier as well. And I want to understand then, given the current circumstances and given what the kind of discussion that we've had at this point in time, what is it then that you foresee in terms of the upcoming elections and in terms of the continuity that we're hoping for with the SIFC and the team? What can you think could possibly be a factor that we really need to look out for in terms of the next plan, and when does this arrangement actually begin? Because it seems that we're done with the first review, but we can't wait for the third review or the end of the standby arrangement before we actually begin talking on those terms.
So, Sana, the forward-looking path is the following. Pakistan will have the second review sometime in February. I will assume that the new government will probably be taking over when we get into the second review. It would not be as easy as the first one. Let me be honest. The December targets are tougher. So we better be doing all the work, and the finance team, the privatization team, the energy team, they all better be gearing up to whatever the indicative targets and the quantitative performance criteria are. So that's the first step that you need to take. In that, always keep an eye on the external disbursement. The only thing that's critical to me as we move forward is that this $25 billion are in the kitty. Our reserves are built from $7.5 billion to somewhere $9 or $9.5 billion, and we sail through the year comfortably. Number two, the administrative measures that Dr. Manzoor very well pointed out, which are the Afghan transit trade work, the anti-smuggling work, the de-dollarization work, and the enforcement on the hoarding. I think is absolutely on the dot there. All these four must be deepened if we really want to see the informality in the economy go down, the Afghan transit monies that are flowing from Pakistan come down, and I hope the establishment really keeps its foot on the accelerator on this, and the Afghans moving back, or all the other country people who are in the country going back to their country. The third tier is SIFC. In SIFC,
right, but Dr. Khaqan, when you talk about this, you say a lot in terms of what you hope for and what you would like to see. But I want to know whether, given the scenario regarding upcoming elections and change of government, will that happen?
I think these three things will stay intact. I think we have established that we have to be with the fund program. I think we'll be transitioning into a new fund program sometime when we finish this one in March, April, I think early April probably, and then we'd be preparing for the new one, whether that's after the budget, but Pakistan would need to be in a program because a lot of work on debt reprofiling and other aspects that need to be done will be much easier under the IMF umbrella than without having the IMF. The only way that we may not get into an IMF program is that SIFC really strikes gold and is able to pick up the kind of investment which I could come back to you and say, now I think that we are comfortable on the external side. I don't think that kind of money would be that quick to come. Though one good news is that we are working on the recorded sale of the shares that the Pakistan government owns through its organizations like PSO and OGDCL. There is an evaluation that's in. Let's see what that evaluation is, how the Saudis react to it, and maybe that will be something that we can see happening in the coming months. So that SIFC work will also continue. So here are the three tiers. But here's the real part, Sana. The new government that has to come in has to have a much more structural agenda on the table. And that means privatization, divestment of the energy sector, correction on the energy subsidies, correction on the energy tariffs. That means that the broadening of the tax base rather than hiking of the tax net. Moving on to what Dr. Saab mentioned, digitization, POS, all kinds of concessions of 2,200 billion revisited, Pakistan's FBR tax to GDP ratio hovering around 9%, to move in the next 5 years to at least 12%. Pakistan's investment to GDP under 14%, moving near close to 20%. These are the real things that the next government has to, really do. Now, can an incoming government deepen the agenda that we've all just talked about, the three aspects? I think that's where we will start then looking at getting out of the IMF 3 years down the road. But if we don't do that, and third figure, of course, and Dr. Saab, I know is an expert on the trade side, so I'd mention and he'd maybe talk, is that our export to GDP at 10% has to move from here to a much higher percentage, and all the structural work there in the next 5 years has to be done. So these three structural agendas, the FPR tax to GDP, the investment to GDP, and the export to GDP will define the next 5 years of the government, along with SIFC,
right,
along
absolutely,
with
and these are the important indicators, and I thank you for pointing them out, Dr. Khaqan, and we will talk in further detail with Dr. Manzoor. But I understand that you have to leave, but thank you very much for joining us and being part of the discussion. Dr. Manzoor, the situation, especially with the SIFC and the kind of factors that were laid down by Dr. Khaqan, are essential and important to the discussion of what lies ahead. And I want to understand then the role that these bodies, such as the SIFC, is going to have in terms of ensuring that we do actually get the numbers, and how then will we be able to move forward, not just with investment coming in the country, but then simultaneously also moving ahead with planning for the IMF? Are we perhaps putting our eggs in one basket more than the other? Is there work that's focusing more on one over the other, or do you think that there is a more holistic approach to that is being conducted, while at the same time, when we talk about the issues and measures and the kind of tougher measures that need to be taken now till the end of the standby arrangement, how is it then that this change in government will be able to sustain that?
Sana, I think, with the previous program, say when we were going into that extended, what they call extended fund facility, there was a lot of uncertainty. Should Pakistan go for an IMF, shouldn't go? And there was, hesitation. It took many, many months to make up that mind. I think there's much less uncertainty now. I think there seems to be a consensus that we would need one more program at least, and then we see. So that's one thing. The second thing is that there is momentum on reforms, and it seems to me that whichever government comes, at least the steps that have been initiated on state enterprises, on taxation, on smuggling, on some of these other things, I think that they're likely to continue, at least in the near future. The third thing is that, yes, an important step that Mr. Khaqan pointed out, that is that so far there's still not much attention being given to exports, and that is an absolute must. I mean, I think the SIFC, the next thing they should give their attention is on exports. And for exports, you need imports. And for the time being, despite IMF conditions that you should ease imports, is still not being done. And a lot of our industrial raw material, it comes and it gets consumed in products and which are then exported. And because of not allowing imports, I think our growth rate is really, really low, and it's not even keeping up with population growth. And that's what is increasing the poverty numbers and others. And I think these are the things after stabilizing the economy. Now they have to move towards these measures so that the poverty goes down and exports pick up and overall GDP growth goes up. I think these things now it's time they move on, because it's for a long time we have been into this, except for 1 year or something. Otherwise, our especially our growth has been much, much lower than our regional countries. Sorry, did you ask me another question? Did you ask me? Was it? I don't know. I lost track. You wanted me to answer some other question, or this is okay?
That's okay, Dr. Manzoor. What I wanted was to get an insight into what needs to be done and what lies ahead. But thank you very much for taking the time out and being part of the discussion as well, and for giving us such insight. And Farrukh, I also want to again take light onto what is happening with regards to the current dynamics and the kind of factors that have been raised by both Dr. Khaqan and Dr. Manzoor. And it seems that we are one step ahead, but there seems to be a lot of unfortunate possibilities of this going backwards. Is there any way to ensure that this doesn't happen?
Right, Sana. I think that because there's commitment from the state of Pakistan that these policies or these changes are going to be implemented, and there's a huge, possibility of investment in the country. I think these reforms will be carried through, and this is what I was saying earlier as well. But I think that Dr. Khaqan, Najeeb, and Dr. Manzoor have both covered most of it brilliantly. So that's it.
All right. We're now going to be moving on to the issue of Palestine and what is going on with regards to the situation on ground and what needs to be done. And we understand that there are different responses coming in as the situation is evolving, and there seems to be a lot of pressure by the international community as what needs to be done. There is also, of course, the call that has been made by Saudi Arabia with regards to putting a limit on the export of arms to Israel. And Faisal, I want to take an understanding in terms of how do you see this particular call and whether or not you think that countries will actually follow through?
Sana, I think it is a positive development, but the very first thing I wanted to highlight is that it took almost 14,000 lives to reach to this conclusion that we have to obviously go for the bigger powers, and of course the bigger powers, they have to get involved to, of course, bring Israel to the table for the negotiations, because Israel is a country that is not listening to anyone. Thankfully, we have countries like Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi foreign minister, he actually took the initiative, and of course rest of the foreign ministers from the Muslim world, they went to seek China's help, and China's help was there. And of course they have asked for this arms embargo. Then we go towards, of course, the BRICS. I mean, South Africa, they have played a pivotal role as well. They have obviously in Pretoria, it hosted a conference, and that virtual conference, it has actually brought in quite a positive initiative, and that is of obviously an arms embargo should be placed on Israel, because they are committing not only war crimes, of course the genocide is being conducted by them on the people of Gaza, people of Palestine, and this is what South Africa it has maintained in this summit and in this conference, and I think this is a positive development. Then there is another statement which is coming from Washington, and that is of obviously President Biden, who is suggesting that, of course, the hostage deal, it is quite near, that it will be concluded. So it means that the positivities are approaching very soon, and this menace which we have been seeing in recent times, in recent days, I mean, madness was being conducted. I mean, mostly what happens is that in any conflict zone, in any conflict areas, people, they get refuge in the schools, in the universities, in the buildings of hospitals, where of course they feel like as if they will be obviously sheltered. And of course United Nations was sheltering these people in the schools and in the university buildings. But what was happening was that as we have been chanting very loud that Gaza was being considered as in this century's Auschwitz, at the same time these schools, these universities and the buildings of hospitals, they were being treated as if they were the gas chambers, because they were Israel was time and again bombing these places, knowing the fact that people there are.
Right, absolutely. I completely understand the situation, Faisal, but my concern again is whether or not there would be action taken on ground. And so I'll pose the same question to you, Farrukh, as well, in terms of whether or not the call for an end to the export of arms will actually happen. And secondly, also the situation in terms of the way that countries such as the US are responding. It seems that the leadership keeps talking about a hostage deal that is going to come through and is looking good, apparently, is what the statement has said. But I want to understand that nothing about what is happening is looking good. And this is not just about a hostages deal, it's about something much more than that. But do you think that because of any such deals that are being proposed, this will just sort of dilute down to this and nothing more?
No, so now when I say that these things, these steps are positive, why I say this, but because at least there are powers now who are actually shaking all of the systems and shaking the conscience which was dead long ago of Israel, to come to table and of course negotiate rather than madly bombing the place. So
right.
Probably this is the time.
Absolutely, Faisal. I understand, but let me also get Farrukh's take on this.
Yeah, Sana, I don't think that this, there are two aspects to this, right? The second one is rather interesting because President Biden has actually spoken about the possibility of a deal. Now, the biggest problem is Netanyahu at this moment is so unpopular within Israel that except for 4% people in a recent survey, rest of the country says that he should step down the moment the war ends. So why would he want the war to end, right? But yesterday, President Biden's, it was his birthday, and I thought that perhaps because of that celebration, there might be some hiatus in the attacks, but that didn't come. Right now, what Netanyahu is actually doing, he has actually quoted Bible and regarding an ancient tribe about which it was written that killed their children also, their women and their animals too. So at this moment, the way his approach is, he is stoking hate and he is using hate. So in that context, tell me what is the best possible option. It is, of course, what Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has so courageously actually flagged, pointed out, that at least start depriving them of weaponry that is being used in this, genocide to the proportions that we haven't seen in Israel, even in Israel before. And I think that if you keep on actually pushing for it, Sana, BRICS is a very important forum. I know that there are certain Islamophobes like India there as well, but still BRICS is a very important forum, and there are others, and Saudi Arabia is very influential. So in coming days, what it is going to do is put pressure on the Israeli state and its European or Western allies, that, and keep in mind that even France, even Germany have called out Netanyahu's policies. I mean, in movies, usually it is shown that violence takes place and somebody is, firing and keeps on singing bullets in a body, when actually three bullets actually kill a person. So what is happening right now? 1,000 people of yours were killed. Now you're killing 14,000, and then you're spinning and spinning that, under this hospital there was a tunnel. In South Asia, it is well known that if you want to actually frame somebody, you can create something over there. So right now, what you are seeing is shameful, and I think that in this context, what Crown Prince has said actually has a lot of merit. It won't immediately materialize, but I think if the moral aspect of it is emphasized more, in coming days you are going to see some effect of that. Sana.
All right, and we hope that we actually get to see that and we take that forward. But thank you very much for the input. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for being part of the debate. That's all that we have the show. We are going to be back with more news as to what is going on around, and we hope that the situation improves by then. See you tomorrow.